Hi Krishna, welcome to the session on Canto 2, the last two chapters, chapter 9 and 10. So we had seen until the chapter 8. So just like a very quick revision, so in the beginning of the second canto, Shukadeva Goswami started speaking about what is to be heard and chanted specifically at the time of death. So he proved in the fact, he kind of explained in the first three chapters how the process of Bhakti Yoga is the better process than other processes like Ashtanga Yoga, demigod worship, or any of those other kind of paths. Bhakti Yoga is much better in comparison to those paths. And then he also um, am I able to, am I audible? Right, Christian? Can someone say, am I audible?
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay. Thank you. Means somebody is saying that they are not able to hear. For others, I'm able to hear. Means am I audible? Because I think somebody is saying that they are not able to hear. I think from my side, everything is fine.
Yeah, I can hear you, Prabhu.
Okay.
You're audible, Prabhu. Audible, but very light, Prabhu. I mean, your voice.
Very light. Okay. I think I'll speak a little louder. Okay. Uh, okay. So I'll speak a little louder. Maybe I was speaking very low. So, in the beginning of the first three chapters, Shukadeva Goswami established how to Parikshit Maharaj, how Bhakti Yoga is the best process for practicing, specifically to hear and chant at the time of death. And then we continued speaking about more things. So, there are more questions, and then we started, Shukadeva Goswami started explaining about the process of creation through the conversation of Narada and Brahma. So in the 4th and 5th chapter, we spoke about process of creation, and in the 6th we spoke about continue to speak about the same the questions of Narada Muni of Purusha Sutta confirmed, and Brahmaji explained the scheduled incarnations in the 7th chapter. And after everything is over, Parikshit Maharaj asked more questions in the chapter 8. So some of those questions will be answered in chapter 9, and some other questions will be answered in chapter 10. And the rest of the questions will be answered throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam. So in this way, we are at this point of in the previous chapter, after all of Parikshit Maharaj's questions about universe, who created it, how it is created, and all those questions were answered by Shukadeva Goswami in a brief manner by quoting the conversation of Narada Muni and Brahmaji. So Parikshit Maharaj asked more questions. So those questions will be answered from now on. So that's what we are going to see in chapter 9. Here, instead of Shukadeva Goswami is going to answer one of the important questions of Parikshit Maharaj by quoting a conversation of Lord Vishnu and Brahma. So before that, he answers the first question of uh, Shukadeva, Parikshit Maharaj. The first question that Parikshit Maharaj asked in chapter 8 was, like, I understand that the spirit and the living entity is spiritual and the body is material. So how is it that the spirit soul becomes almost completely identified with the body? So it's very difficult to understand. So that is the first question Shukadeva Goswami takes up. He says how a spirit soul completely identifies with his or her material body. He says the relationship of the jiva with the body is unreal but it actually the soul conceives of it non-different from itself due to Lord's Maya potency. He gives an example how if a dreamer sees himself in his own dream, that that is like that's like unreal. So similarly here, the soul is identifying with the body while enjoying in the three modes and develops the conception of I and mind due to illusory energy. But Shukadeva Goswami says, by the practice of Bhakti Yoga, one can become free from this conception of I and mine and the influence of the three modes and specifically the illusory potency of the Lord, which creates this identification of the soul, identification for the soul with the material body. So this connection, this false identification could be removed by the practice of Bhakti Yoga. So this is what Shukadeva Goswami answers. And here we continue the other Shukadeva Goswami continues to answer other questions of Parikshit Maharaj. For this, he takes help of a conversation that happened between Brahmaji and Narayan, Lord Vishnu. So Brahmaji, when he first appeared on the lotus from which sprouted from the navel of Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, so he couldn't see anything. It was dark and he wasn't sure what he was supposed to do because he was the first created living entity. So as we all know, he was looking in all directions and then he heard this voice, tapa, meaning perform austerity. So once he heard that, he thought, okay, let me try to follow this instruction. So he started executing penances. He executed penances for a good 1,000 celestial years, and specifically by concentrating his mind and controlling his prana and senses. So in this way, he underwent severe penances. So the Supreme Lord Vishnu, being pleased with the penances of Brahmaji, shows him, appears personally, and then gives him a darshan of the spiritual world Vaikuntha. So this is this section we see from the verse 9 to 18. The darshan that the Supreme Lord Vishnu showed to Lord Brahma of Vaikuntha. So what is this? Before creating a, a kind of a reflection, he needs to see the original thing because we consider the material world as a reflection of the spiritual world. So Brahmaji was being shown of that original place based on which he needs to create the material world. So for that, he first of all showed the darshan of the spiritual world. So the darshan, the Vaikuntha, Lord shows the Vaikuntha being pleased with Brahmaji's penance. This the supreme planet, the Vaikuntha, which Lord Brahma is being shown is considered the supreme planet. It's a spiritual planet, adored by all self-realized persons, and it's free from suffering, confusion, fear of offenses, the influence of the modes, the influence of time, and the influence of the illusory energy. These three things all come from uh, is all present in the material world. But the influence of Maya, the influence of the three modes, and the influence of the time is not present in the spiritual world. And there, the Supreme Lord is continuously worshipped by various personalities. So that is the nature of the spiritual world that the that the Supreme Lord shows to Lord Brahma. And then Lord Brahma could see the different inhabitants of the Vaikuntha Loka. He sees how they're all having a glowing sky, bluish complexions, lotus eyes, dressed in yellow garments, youthful, effulgent, having a pleasing mood, attitude, demeanor. They're all four-handed and decorated with shining earrings, crowns, and garlands. So in this way, Brahmaji sees the inhabitants of the spiritual world, and he also sees how various various inhabitants of the Vaikuntha planets are flying in airplanes with their consorts. And that particular scene looks like a sky filled with clouds because they are all very bluish and are wearing yellow garments. It looks like a flashing and lightning. So in this way, he sees all the residents of Vaikunta traveling, and he also sees Mother Lakshmi is actually sweeping sometimes the floor, even though there is no dust. And as he's seeing Lakshmi Devi serving the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord, like giving a massage to Supreme Lord's lotus feet and sweetly singing for his pleasure. So in this way, he sees Mother Lakshmi is engaged in the service, and he also sees that the Supreme Lord, who is the Lord of all the devotees, including Lakshmi Devi, he is the Lord of all the universe's sacrifices, and he is being served by his followers like Sunanda, Nanda, Prabhala, and Arhana. So in this way, he sees how in the spiritual world the Supreme Lord is very nicely served by his associates. And he also sees how what is the beauty of the Supreme Lord. So he also sees how the Lord was sitting on his throne surrounded by his energies like the four principles of Prakriti, Purusha, Mahatattva, and Ego, the 16 five elements, the ten sense organs in the mind, the five elements, and the six natural opulences, the Ashtasiddhis. All of them were actually serving the Supreme Lord. They were all servants of the Supreme Lord. Thus, seeing the Supreme Lord, Brahma was completely overwhelmed with joy because he was initially in total darkness. When he was actually born, all he could see was nothing he could see in actually, and all he could hear was only the words tapa. And now here, and he has performed a long penance in austerity for thousands celestial years, and finally he has this amazing darshan of the spiritual world. So he's really overwhelmed with joy, and in great ecstasy and tears, he actually bows down to the Supreme Lord. He's really like completely overwhelmed with ecstasy. So he just goes to the Supreme Lord, and the Supreme Lord is being pleased. He is pleased because he is because of the penances of Brahma. Like how just by hearing the word Tapa, Brahmaji accepted that and then executed severe penances for thousands celestial years. He didn't stop because like he didn't see anyone. So just by hearing, taking the instruction very seriously, since he performed those penances sincerely, Lord Vishnu was completely pleased. So he appears to him and then he congratulates Brahmaji for the wonderful feat of performing such severe penances and austerities to please him by by shaking his hand with Lord Brahma. And then he also says that he's very satisfied with the long penance that Brahmaji carried out. And he says, I'm generally not satisfied with pseudo mysteries. So, me being satisfied with you proves that you honestly performed these penances for my pleasure. And he also says how the Supreme Lord says, please ask for benedictions. Now that you have pleased me, so I can give you any benediction that you want. He also says, Brahmaji, please understand, just having my darshan is the ultimate benediction that you have already achieved. The penance is the fruit of any penance. The benefit of any penance is to actually have my darshan. So that ultimate benediction you already have. If in case you need something else, please ask for those benedictions. So he says it's just my darshan and the darshan of my abode. These were actually very rare. So you already have that. So please ask if you need any more benedictions. So Brahmaji says to the Lord Vishnu that you are the super soul. You already know what is in my heart. So you know all my desires. Still, I'll ask you some questions. So he asked these questions to the Supreme Lord. So these four questions primarily that Brahmaji is going to ask in the coming section will form the answers to these questions form the most important section of Bhagavatam, one of the important sections of the Bhagavatam called Chatushloki Bhagavatam. So Lord, now the Supreme Lord will answer Brahmaji in four verses, explaining the core of Srimad Bhagavatam, the principles, the core principles of Srimad Bhagavatam. So before seeing the answers, let's look at the questions that Brahmaji asked to the Supreme Lord. So in verse 26, I hope everybody is able to hear me now. Is it a little better?
Yeah, Prabhuji.
Okay. So in the verse 26, Brahmaji asked the Supreme Lord about, please tell me about your material and spiritual forms. So he asked this question first because it's very important to know that the Supreme Lord is not just impersonal, but he is also has a personal form. And what is it a material form? Is it a spiritual form? So this is the particular question that Parikshit Maharaj has asked. So this particular question, if you see in the chapter 8, actually Parikshit Maharaj asked from verse 8 to 11 of chapter 8 something relate about this. So if you kind of combine the questions of Parikshit Maharaj from verse 8 to 11, it will be something similar to Brahmaji's first question. It's all mostly about the forms of the about the forms of the spiritual law, of the Supreme Lord and the Jiva. So he is asking, please tell me about your material and spiritual forms. I hope if everybody is able to hear me, if someone has problem, I think you may have to put a headphone. The system speaker may not be powerful. So the question 2 of Brahmaji is Lord's energies, because Lord's forms is one aspect, and the other main aspect is Lord is Shaktiman. So to understand that he is Shaktiman means he has energies, he has potencies, is a very important aspect of understanding the Supreme Lord. It's a very critical aspect of understanding the Supreme Lord in terms of that he is a person. Person means he has energies, Shaktiman. So how are these various spiritual and material energies of the Supreme Lord working? So this is the other question that he asked. So this is somewhat similar to the 23rd question of Parikshit Maharaj in chapter 8. And then Brahmaji asks about the Supreme Lord's activities. What are your activities in relation to your material and spiritual energies? We understand you have material energy and spiritual energy, but what do you do with them? How do you engage them, or how do you engage with them? What are your activities in relation to your material and spiritual energies? Please explain that. So this is also something similar to the question 23rd in the question asked by Parikshit Maharaj in the verse 23rd of chapter 8. And Brahmaji, it's not the last one is not more like a question, rather like a request. He says, please give me your mercy for executing your service. You have given me your service now to actually do the secondary creation of this universe. So please give me your mercy so that I can execute this service for you without pride and bondage and pride and the bondage that comes because of material pride. So he prays because he has to engage with the modes. So there is a chance that people become proud and then get bound in this material world by the three modes. So he is praying for the mercy of the Supreme Lord in the last question. So now we will see how each of these questions will be answered by the Supreme Lord in the coming section. So the four questions were the forms of the Supreme Lord. Tell me about your material and spiritual forms, and the Lord's energies, Lord's activities, and Brahmaji requesting for mercy of the Supreme Lord for executing the service that he received. So now we will see in this section verses 31 to 38 about Chatushloki Bhagavatam. That means the Bhagavatam in essential 4 verses. So before going into the Chatushloki, Vishnu says to Brahmaji how Sri Bhagavan Vacha, he starts speaking. He says, Jnanam Paramabhutyam me yad vijnana samanvitam sarahasyam tadangam cha grahana gatitam mana. He speaks. Lord Vishnu tells Brahmaji that now I am going to tell you these 4 things. Jnanam means the most secret knowledge of my form, because that is the first question about the Supreme Lord's form. and then Vijnanam, how the realization of that form, how to realize that form, and Sarahasyam, he says Prema Bhakti, the the this is one of the acharyas, Jiva Goswami gives this. Sarahasyam, the secret, the most secret is Prema Bhakti, Tadangamcha. So how do you go there? So for that we need to begin to practice sadhana bhakti. So that is the answer. That is the fourth Chatushloki, fourth verse. So different acharyas give us different insights into these four verses. So we're not going really in detail. We're just seeing the basics. So Chatushloki Bhagavatam, the first one, the question was, please tell us about your material and spiritual forms. So here, the Supreme Lord answers, he says, before creation of the material universe, I exist as the Lord of the spiritual world. And after creation of the material universes, I exist in the universe as the super soul, and I come as also various avatars. And after this material universe will go, I still exist as the Lord of Vaikuntha. So in this way, he is always there. He is the one who exists even before the creation. So he is eternal, he is always present. So that's what he says. Aham eva samevagre nanyad sada satparam paschadaham yadetatcha yo avasishyeta so asmi. So basically the Supreme Lord's form is eternal and his form is spiritual. But he also manifests the material universe and assumes the form of super soul and various avatars for the benefit of the conditioned souls. And that as assuming the form of the material universe could be considered as a material form of the Lord, even though means it is not his personal form, but it expands, it comes from him. It could be considered as his material form. So that is the first explanation that the Supreme Lord gives. That how he is beyond the material universe. So he cannot be material. He even exists before the material universe is created. And he is spiritual. And even after it gets annihilated, he exists as Lord of Vaikuntha. In this way, he explains how about his spiritual form and then the material universe that is being created from him as the material form. And the second question was about the Lord's energies. So he says, Rite pratiyeta na pratiyeta chatmani tad vidyatmano maya yatha bhasho yatha tamaha. So the Supreme Lord explains how Rite artham. If anything that whatever one sees in this world or whatever appears to be of any value in this world, if it is seen without the relation to the Supreme Lord, it has no reality. And that vision of seeing something separate from the Supreme Lord is called as illusion. Seeing anything separate from the Supreme Lord is called as illusory energy. So Jiva Goswami gives this example how someone may say, how is the material, if the external energy is material, how is it present in the Supreme Lord? So he gives the example how sun is the cause of the creation of the shadow or darkness in one sense, because absence of light creates darkness, but there is no darkness in the light itself. It is the absence of light that creates the darkness. So similarly, when the sun reflects a particular object, we can see a shadow falling. So the moment that we are looking at the shadow, we are not looking at the light. If we continue to look at the light, then we won't see the shadow. So similarly, if anybody is focused on Krishna, the absence of Krishna won't be experienced, which is called as Maya. So the same thing he is explaining how. So so in this way, seeing anything without relation to Krishna is considered as illusion, but everything has a connection to Krishna. Seeing things in its right perspective is not considered illusion. Okay. So this is the second answer, that The next one is, I hope this was clear, that how all about the Supreme Lord's energies, everything is Lord's energy. The material energy is also coming from the Supreme Lord. But mainly, seeing anything without the connection with the Supreme Lord becomes illusory for us. It means an external energy for us. It acts in a way that it takes us away from the concept, the right conception, and puts us into illusion and causes misery. So that is why if it is our vision, because in one sense, how to see the Supreme Lord in everything, how to see His energies is, if everything is connected, seen in a way which is connected, how it is related to the Supreme Lord, if that vision is there, then we won't be affected by the illusory energy, because both of these energies belong to the Supreme Lord, the spiritual energy as well as the material energy. So that is why Jiva Goswami says, how is the material energy related with the Supreme Lord? Like the sun and the shadow. The shadow is created by the sun, but it is the darkness is not present in the sun. So similarly, the external energy comes from the Supreme Lord, but he has no Maya within him. He has no modes within him. He is untouched by it. So in that way, he has both these energies, but the main aspect of that, where is that energy, illusory energy? What is illusion? It is actually our perception of seeing something unrelated to Krishna, or it's without relation to Krishna, is the main aspect of, or how that is how the illusory energy acts upon us. I hope it was clear. If someone wants to ask anything on this, so let's go to the next question that Brahmaji asked to the Supreme Lord. So here he speaks about, we understand you have external and internal energies or material and spiritual energies, but what are your activities in relation to them? So this is the next question that Brahmaji asked. So the Supreme Lord answers by his words, Yata Mahanti Bhutani Bhuteshu cha Avasheshu cha Anu Pravishtani Apravishtani Tata Teshu Nateshu. He says that the Supreme Lord explains how he exists within everything created. At the same time, he is present outside of everything also. That he is related with the material energy, but at the same time, he has a separate existence in the spiritual energy. So both the activities are there. He has his activities in the material world because he is present in the all-pervasive form, the form of Paramatma and Brahman, in the material world. At the same time, in his spiritual form, he is enjoying his spiritual pastimes in the spiritual world. So this is considered the answer for how the Lord considers or conducts his activities in relation to different energies. So he is participating in the material world in a certain form, but he also is completely aloof from it, and then he is existing in the spiritual world. So some of the acharyas also mention how this is the Prema Bhakti, means like seeing Krishna everywhere, outside of, at the same time, outside of everything. When Krishna says that means seeing Krishna everywhere, that is only possible for a very highly advanced soul. So that vision is considered prema. Only a Prema Bhakta can see the Supreme Lord everywhere. So that is why some of the acharyas consider this verse speaking about Prema Bhakti also. And the last question was, please give me your mercy. Brahmaji was asking Lord Vishnu, please give me your mercy so that I can execute this service that you have given to me without being affected by pride and thus being bound by this material energy. So here, the Supreme Lord says, one who is searching after the absolute truth must perform sadhana bhakti, which is determined as the best process. So that's why I explain why Krishna or Vishnu is saying this. He's saying actually only by bhakti you can overcome bondage, pride, and lethargy. So just practice this process of bhakti while engaged in your activities. You won't be affected. Ye tavadeva jityasyam tattva jityasanatmana anvaya vetirekhavyam yatyat sarvatra sarvatra. So it's a very kind of a practical advice. You have to do your duty, but how can you be unaffected by uh, in the course of performing that duty? So Krishna is here giving a practical angle. He says, practice the principles of sadhana bhakti, by which one can overcome the bondage, pride, and lethargy. In this way, he answers all these four different questions that Brahmaji asked in essence to him, and he explains in the form of Chaturshloki. So, anyone who wants to ask anything at this point, we can take. Otherwise, we can go forward to the next section. I understand I can go to greater details about this because these four verses could be spoken with the help of so many commentaries and deep. I'm just presenting the overview. So in 37th and 38th verse, then the Supreme Lord speaks. He says how to understand the deep meaning of Chaturshloki. He says, if you follow these instructions that I have given you with extreme concentration, you will never be bewildered and you will understand them better. And he says, after instructing Brahma in this way, the Supreme Lord actually disappeared from his vision after giving all these answers. And after the Lord disappears, then Brahma continues to recreate the universe because he has to, now he has an instruction and he has been empowered to do that. And he then begins the second recreation. Recreation means the whole universe is already created by the Supreme Lord, but the details will be filled in by Brahma. So that's why this one is called as recreating the universe. And from verses 41 to 43, then Sukadeva Goswami explains how once when Brahma was continuing to render his service in this way, he comes to, Narada Muni comes to Brahmaji and then inquires about Lord's Maya, the external energy. And Brahma, to his son Narada Muni, then speaks Srimad Bhagavatam with its 10 characteristics. Because any Purana should have, Mahapurana should have 10 characteristics. So Brahmaji actually received those four seed verses, but when Narada Muni wanted to know about Lord's Maya, external energy, about which the Supreme Lord had actually explained to Brahma, so he explains the whole thing in the form of Srimad Bhagavatam. For his question, he explains the whole Srimad Bhagavatam with its 10 characteristics. And then Brahmaji, what Brahmaji spoke to Narada Muni was then spoke by Narada Muni to Vyasadeva. So Shukadeva Goswami explains in this way how Srimad Bhagavatam was spoken initially by the Supreme Lord in the form of Chaturshloki. Then Brahmaji expands it, and then he speaks to Narada Muni, and Narada Muni speaks to Vyasadeva. And he says that in this way it was received by Vyasadeva, and then Shukadeva Goswami, after explaining that, he says, dear Parikshit Maharaj, now I'll explain you how the universe manifested from the universal form and other questions as well. So I'll explain you those details because so far he has explained few of the answers to Parikshit Maharaj's questions, like in the 9th chapter. Initially he spoke, why is the material body and the spirit soul is like identification of the spirit soul with the material body is so strong. How is it possible? If the soul is spiritual and if the body is material, how can they both come together, and as well as how can the soul identify with matter? So then Shukadeva Goswami explained how due to the illusory energy of the Lord, even though it is unreal, because of the false ego, the living entity identifies with the body and develops this conception of I and mine. Only by the practice of bhakti could be removed. And then he started speaking about the other questions of Parikshit Maharaj, like quoting Narada Muni, Brahmaji's and Lord Vishnu's conversation. Because when Lord Brahma took birth, there was nothing. So he heard this voice tapa, so he executed penances. The Supreme Lord showed him Vaikuntha darshan and then congratulated him for his penances and then asked him for benedictions. So Brahmaji asked these questions about the energies of the Supreme Lord. Because Parikshit Maharaj also asked about the energies of the Supreme Lord. So Shukadeva Goswami actually spoke this conversation between Brahmaji and Supreme Lord, which spoke in which they discussed about the relationship of the different energies of the Supreme Lord with himself. What are his different energies and how they are related to him and how does he perform activities in those energies. So that was the main topic. So that's why he quotes this conversation of Chaturshloki Bhagavatam, and there the Supreme Lord answered all of them. And then Shukadeva Goswami explained how once Narada Muni also went to Brahmaji. Then Brahmaji explained Srimad Bhagavatam to him. And Narada Muni explained it to Vyasadeva. And he says, now I have told all these, I have answered this question of what is the different energies of the Supreme Lord. Now I'll explain how the universe manifested from the universal form and your other questions as well. So now it brings us to chapter 10. So anyone has any questions we can take at this point? I have received one question in the chat. Let me just read this and see if it is related to the discussion and quickly answer it. Can you explain this? I mean, everything is material until it is used in Krishna service. Then that being becomes spiritualized. Is that correct? So table is material until you use it in Krishna service. Say for example, if say when we say we use like a phone or a Prabhupada used to say that a microphone is being used in the service of Krishna. So that is not illusion. Means it will not put us into illusion. It will not cause us bondage. Ultimately, everything is Krishna's energy. Everything is spiritual in one sense. How when we try to enjoy something, even though it is we call it material or matter, when we try to exploit it, we become uh, bound by it. That is the in that angle Krishna is speaking these verses that how when you see anything without relation to Krishna, that is illusory energy. That's what he answers to Brahmaji. Anything that you see without its connection to me, then that becomes illusory energy for you, because anything that we see in without its connection to Krishna and we try to enjoy it, then that causes bondage. That is the source of our material situation. So that becomes the illusory energy for us. In that angle, Krishna was explaining. So a table when used in Krishna's service doesn't become in terms like inherently spiritual. It is not that it is not no more made of five material elements. It is now spiritual. Not like that in that sense. Because ultimately everything is coming from Krishna. Everything is spiritual in one sense. The idea is if I engage my phone in sense gratification, that becomes a source of Maya for me. That implicates me in the external energy. But if I use it in Krishna service, the same material thing can help me deliver myself from this material world. If I engage all the things related that I have in relation to Krishna, if I engage them in Krishna service, then they become a source of liberation for me. So anything that we deal in this world can be a source of liberation or a source of bondage. So in that angle, Krishna is explaining. I hope this question was answered. If you have anything, you can follow up in the chat box. So chapter 10. So now that Shukadeva Goswami said, I will explain you more about how the universe is manifested from the universal form and more aspects. So that's what he promised in the previous chapter end. And he will explain how the universe manifested from the universal form. So we are here in the chapter 10. So it's almost time. So I'll quickly finish. So in the beginning, he is going to speak about the 10 characteristics of a Purana. If you remember, in the end of the chapter, he said, Brahmaji explained Srimad Bhagavatam to Narada Muni with 10 characteristics. So that 10 characteristics, the 10 characteristics he is going to explain now. What are those 10 characteristics? Like Atra Sargo Visargascha, Sthanam Poshanamutaya, Manvantara Ishanukata, Nirodho Muktirashray. So that he is going to explain that these 10 topics. What are those 10 characteristics of Srimad Bhagavatam that Brahmaji spoke to Narada? That's why he's explaining this, because he said, I'll speak to you about how the universe came from the universal form, and then he begins with this. The reason is he wanted to give what are those 10 characteristics. In short, those 10 characteristics are Sarga, which is creation, secondary creation, and the situation of planetary systems, protection of the Supreme Lord, and the creative impetus of the conditioned souls, and the rule of different manus, because Brahmaji's life is composed of 14 manus. One day is composed of 14 manus. So, speaking about those manvantaras, Ishanukatha, the science of God, and also Nirodha, means how does the living entity go back to the spiritual kingdom, Mukti, liberation, and Ashraya, which is the essence of all these topics, which is the support, the center of all these different topics, 9 topics, which is called the Samam Bodham. So all these topics are in short, like explained in all the cantos. But some of the cantos speak about one of these topics prominently. So we will see that also. Like so Sarga will be is like explained to some extent in this particular canto. Visarga will be explained in third canto and a little bit in the fourth canto. Sthanam will be primarily described in canto 5 in a lot of detail. Portionum is all over Srimad Bhagavatam, but specifically the canto 6 speaks about Ajamil and Vrutrasur, even and Uti deserts, Prahlad Maharaj and Hiranyakashipu, specifically showing this aspect of spiritual and material desires. Manvantara Katha means chapter. Canto 8 speaks about the different reigns of Manus, different Manus that come in the day of Brahma, and then who are the avatars in those Manvantaras, what are the different pastimes that happen in those Manvantaras, who is the demigod in charge, Indra, and in this way, all the details are given in Canto 8 in detail. Ishanukata, Science of God, is explained in in Canto 9. Nirodha is Canto 12, Mukti, Liberation is Canto 11, and Ashraya is the central one is considered Canto 10, which that's why it primarily speaks about Lord Krishna. So in this way, he speaks these 10 characteristics of the Bhagavatam, explaining it to Parikshit Maharaj. So Sukadeva Goswami, after explaining these characteristics, explains how Paramatma is the shelter of all the souls in this material world, and then he explains that how Krishna says that Paramatma comes from him in the Bhagavad Gita chapter 10:42. He says means Ekam Shena Sthito Jara. Says the whole world is pervaded by one Amsha of Krishna. Then here he says that Amsha is the shelter of the soul. That Amsha, that Paramatma gives the shelter to the soul. So in this way, when Krishna says he is the shelter of Paramatma and Paramatma gives shelter to the soul, we can understand how Krishna is the supreme Ashraya for the soul. And he says that Paramatma is the shelter of both Adhyatma, or the shelter of Adhyatma, Vidaiva, and Adhibhauta aspects of the material universe. And in this way, Parikshit Maharaj explained the 10 characteristics of the Purana. So, and then he explained how Paramatma is the shelter for the soul. So, this is after explaining the 10 characteristics of the Purana, he speaks about Sarga, means creation of Virat Rupa. So, from Mahavishnu, actually the universe is created, and then Garbhodakshaya Vishnu enters into that universe. So the whole detail is again given in short here, how the Supreme Lord enters into the material universe as Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, and from his own body he produces the Garbhodaka ocean and then lies down. The main reason for Garbhodakshaya Vishnu to enter is the Dravya, Karma, Kala, Swabhava, Jiva, all of these things are there in the universe already, injected by Lord Mahavishnu into the universe. But they cannot act without the presence of the Supreme Lord because they have no effect. So that is why Garbhodakshaya Vishnu is actually going into the universe to actually activate all of them. And then so now in this whole section we are going to see how Garbhodakshaya Vishnu is Supreme Lord. He has no material desires. So what he does for the creation of the material universe, he creates a Virat Rupa, subtle and gross, and from there the material creation begins. So from his navel, he creates the golden lotus, which is called as Hiranya Garbha, sometimes Hiranya lotus, and in that he creates through the help of the external energy, he creates that lotus, and on that lotus, Brahmaji appears. So, and from there, the secondary creation begins. But for the secondary creation to begin, he has to manifest few other things. So, all those things manifest from the Garbhodakshaya Vishnu. But since he has no material desires, he doesn't have desires for sensory activities. He does not have hunger or thirst and all these things that is there in the conditioned living souls. So for the conditioned living entity to develop hunger, thirst, and all these senses, everything, it has to come from the Supreme Lord. But Garbhodakshay Vishnu cannot have all these things because he is spiritual. He doesn't have any material desires or material sense organs or material activity. So that is why intermediary form is called as Virat Rupa is created from Garbhodakshay Vishnu, who actually becomes the source of all these different aspects or that the living entity will have later. So the the from the body of the Garbhodakshay Vishnu, then this Hiranyagarbha comes, the lotus comes, which actually will become the source of Adidaiva, Adibhuta, and Adhyatmika. So from the ether, the universal form begins like an embryonic form initially, mainly from the ether, and from that ether comes the life best of life air called as Sutra. Ojas, Sahas, Balam, everything comes, and from those arises the prana. So with prana only the sense activities can begin. So first manifests prana, or and then the now that the prana is there, so the Virat Rupa, which is an embryonic form, begins to experience hunger and thirst. So once there is hunger and thirst and all these different desires, then gross sense organ, subtle sense organ, the sense devata, the sense activity, the subtle sense organ, the gross sense organ, everything is created from that particular desire from which is produced in the Virat Rupa. So if I am, I'll just explain again. Now that Mahavishnu created the universes and the Mahavishnu enters the universe as Garbhodakshay Vishnu, and from Garbhodakshay Vishnu the material universe has to be created. The other details have to be created. So for but he is this Garbhodakshay Vishnu is spiritual, and and the material creations involves the touch of material modes. So there is an intermediary Virat form, subtle and gross can manifest, and from there everything is going to all the aspects of the universe will be manifested, specifically the desires, the sense organs, all these aspects will be manifested from the Virat Rupa. So for that Garbhodakshay Vishnu first manifests the lotus. Later from this lotus Brahmaji will be manifested. So this lotus is the source of all Adidaiva, Adibhuta, and Adhyatmika aspects of the universe. And an embryonic Virat Rupa from the ether element, which is the first created element, it develops the prana, the living. Then the Virat Rupa develops the desires like hunger, thirst, and from each of these desires, different things will be produced from the desire. Say, for example, from the desire of the Virat Rupa to smell, nose will be produced. The gross sense organ nose will be produced, and from that, the subtle sense organ, as called as Grahana, will be produced. And Ashwini Kumaras, who are the two devatas, sense devatas for this, they will be produced. And then the aspect of smell, the subtle sense object smell. Nose can be there, but if there is no ability to smell, so that subtle sense object is called as smell. And then the gross object which has with from everything from that gross element, the five gross elements, one of them, the earth, has the aspect of smell, so that earth element is also created from it. So I was just giving an example how the Virat Rupa develops this desire to smell, and from that comes the gross sense organ nose, the subtle sense organ called as Grahana, and then the sense devata Ashwini Kumaras, and the sense object called smell. Because we try to say, we take a flower, we try to sense that smell in that flower, which is like a subtle thing. You cannot see the smell, but it is a very subtle thing. And then the gross element, earth. So the flower comes from the earth. So the flower's ability to produce a certain kind of smell will not depends on the type of earth that it is being produced also. It'll affect its ability to have a certain type of sense, smell. So in this way, each desire of the Supreme Lord creates a set of sense organ, a subtle sense organ, a sense devata who will preside over that particular sense organ's activities, and a subtle sense object and a gross element or activity. Like if the Lord wants to say, for example, experience to speak, so speak means he has to produce voice, and the subtle sense organ is Vak. And the Agni Devata is called as the sense Devata for Vak Shakti. And here there is no sense object or gross element. The activity is produced, the activity of speech that is being produced from the Lord's desire to speak. So in this way, each and every desire of the Supreme Lord, in the form of through the Virat Rupa, manifest in various set of sense organs and sense activities. And now that all these things are being created, then for the living entities to have the bodies, they need seven dhatus like skin, bones, flesh, blood, fat, marrow, and all these different kinds of things are all produced then from this Virat Rupa, because they are made of earth, water, and fire. So then the prana is already there. So now Parikshit Maharaj asks this question: oh, everything is there. The elements that need to compose the body is there. The prana is there. The sense organs are there. The sense devata is there. Subtle sense object is there. The gross element is there. But how does this whole thing come together? He says then that naturally the senses gravitate to the sense objects. Sense objects appear attractive because of the false ego, and the mind is also sustains all these changes, and the intelligence creates discrimination. So basically, what Shukdev Goswami is saying is, through the subtle body, the gross body is connected. The soul connects to this gross body, which is so different from itself, through the gross body of mind, intelligence, and false ego. So in this way, he explains how the gross Virat Rupa is the source of all the creations within this material world. And then he explains Visarga. Visarga means secondary creation. What does Brahmaji do? So now that everything, all the principal elements are created and the concepts are created. Now Brahmaji is born on the golden lotus. And then he performs the action of creating the forms and activities of the living entities. He creates Prajapatis, Manus, Devatas, humans, animals, reptiles. In this way, he creates different kinds of species depending on the karma. And based on demigods, human beings, and asuras, demoniac beings, there is a lot of permutation combination, and other living beings are created out of that. And then Vishnu, once Brahmaji does this creation, Vishnu maintains, and Lord Shiva destroys when it is time for annihilation. So in this way, some devotees appreciate the Supreme Lord in the role as creator, but some devotees appreciate the Lord as one who enjoys spiritual pastimes. So Shukadeva Goswami explains how even though the Lord does not directly carry out creation, maintenance, or destruction of this material universe, why the Vedic literatures speak everything in relation to the Supreme Lord is to make a point that it is not just the material energy, the source of all of these things, because that's what the scientists say, everything comes from the matter. So to disprove that or to discredit that opinion, that the Vedic literature involves the Supreme Lord in each of these aspects of creation, maintenance, and destruction, even though he's not exactly dealt with that, he's not dealing with that, or he's not affected by it. Like Mahavishnu, he just comes and lies down. He has nothing else to do. He just looks at. He has nothing else to do. Or Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, he comes and lies down. That's all he does. There is a Virat Rupa from which everything else is manifested. So he doesn't have a direct contact in that sense. Still, he is the source. That is why these pastimes are again and again explained to show that how ultimately the Supreme Lord is the material and the effective cause of the creation. And usually the Sarga happens before the beginning of Brahma's life. Sarga means that Mahavishnu, universes come from the body of Mahavishnu. That happens because Brahma is not even born that time, because Garbhodakshaya Vishnu has even entered into the universe. So once Garbhodakshaya Vishnu comes and then the Virat Rupa is created and everything is created, then Brahmaji comes. So in the beginning of Brahmaji's life, secondary creation called as Visarga happens. So Shukadeva Goswami explained all these things. And then Shukadeva Goswami says, now that I have explained how the universe is created from the universal form, let me explain to you about the measurement of time soon. And before explaining the measurement of time, let me speak to you about Padma Kalpa. So then Shaunaka Rishis uh, headed by all the Shaunaka, the rishis headed by Shaunaka Rishi, they say, actually, you earlier spoke about Vidura's pilgrimage, that he went on a pilgrimage, he met Maitreya Rishi, and he spoke to Maitreya Rishi for a long time, and then came to Hastinapur to help Dhritarashtra. Can you tell us more about that conversation that happened between Vidura and Maitreya? And what is the reason for Vidura to give up his family? And why did he again come back? And what did he do during the pilgrimage? Is that all that he did is not just meeting with Maitreya Rishi, because we know that he traveled to various other places of pilgrimage also. So whereas he went, what did he speak to Maitreya? And first of all, why did he leave home and why did he come back? So all these questions are asked by the rishis, because a lot of technical things are going on, so they kind of wanted to speak about more about Vidura and Maitreya. So then Sutta Goswami said, okay, if you want to hear more about Vidura and Maitreya, I can explain that through the conversation of Parikshit and Shukadeva Goswami, because Parikshit also asked about Vidura Maitreya conversation to Shukadeva Goswami. So let me speak to you about the conversation of Vidura and Maitreya, which is as spoken by Shukadeva Goswami to Parikshit Maharaj. So in this way, the second canto comes to an end. Because when Sudha Goswami is now going to begin to speak about Vidura and Maitreya conversation in the next canto 3. So at this point, what we saw was, first of all, Parikshit Maharaj asked about what is the thing to hear and chant. So Sukadeva Goswami answered that. Then he had more questions about creation, material energy, how the universe is created. He explained it through the conversation of Narada Muni and Brahmaji, and he asked more questions, so that for answering one of the questions he used the conversation between Lord and Brahma and spoke the Chatushloki Bhagavatam to explain the relationship of the Supreme Lord with his energies. And then he also, since he asked multiple questions, then he explained about how the whole creation comes from the Virat Rupa. And then he wanted to speak more about, so then he wanted to speak, continue to speak. But the sages of Naimisharanya asked Sutta Goswami, yes, we understand that what Sukadeva Goswami is going to explain, but can you speak about Vidura Maitreya conversation? So then Sutta Goswami will explain in the next canto 3 about the conversation between uh, what happened between the conversation that happened between Vidura and Maitreya. So if any questions are there at this point, we can take. Otherwise, essentially, I have completed today's session. Sorry for going over time.